Snow lay deep in the folds of the mountain, softening every edge, swallowing every sound until the world felt like it was holding its breath. Inside the cabin, the fire hummed low, throwing an amber glow across rough-hewn walls and the bent silhouette of Elias Crowther, mending a strap by lamplight. Clara sat near the hearth, the flame painting her hair in flickers of gold, her fingers moving with quiet determination as she sewed leather scraps into the shape of mittens. She had grown steadier in her work, though she still paused sometimes, as if listening for the echo of voices that no longer belonged here. When Elias rose to fetch more wood, she was already halfway to the door, reaching for the pail. "I'll get it," she said softly. It wasn't defiance. It was something gentler, like the sound of thawing ice. He didn't argue. The crunch of her boots outside was muffled by the snow, and when she returned, cheeks flushed with cold, she set the pail beside the stove without meeting his eyes. But her breath lingered in the air between them, visible, as though some unspoken thing had taken shape. By midday, the wind picked up. Snow scudded against the windows, the sky dimming in a way that spoke of a storm finding its way through the passes. Elias was fitting a new handle to his axe when a knock rattled the door. Sharp, hurried, too deliberate to be the wind. He opened it to find Red McGraw standing there, coat white with frost, eyes flicking past him to Clara. "They're coming," Red said, stepping inside. "Pike and 2 others. Heading up from town. Won't be long." Clara's needle froze mid-stitch. She didn't look at Red or at Elias, but her breathing quickened, her gaze fixed on the fire like she might fall in and disappear. "Then I should go," she whispered. "If they find me here, it'll be you they'll punish." Elias set the axe aside, straightening slowly. "You're not running from any man again." His voice was even, but there was weight in it, the kind that settled in the bones. Her eyes lifted to his, and for a moment the air between them trembled. "You don't know what they'll do." "I've seen enough to guess," he said, "and I've lived through worse." Red shifted his weight, looking between them. "Best be ready," he muttered. "They'll try talking first. Then they'll try taking." When Red left, the cabin seemed smaller, the fire's light sharper. Elias checked his rifle, thumb brushing the worn metal of the trigger guard. He added logs to the fire, not for warmth but for light, preparing, as if the glow itself could stand watch. Clara busied herself with nothing, folding and refolding the same piece of cloth. Outside, the wind carried a distant rhythm, the hollow, deliberate strike of hooves on frozen ground. By morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the world blindingly white. The first sound was the crunch of boots in frost, steady and unhurried. Elias stood in the doorway, rifle in his hands, when Pike appeared, broad as a freight wagon, his fur coat unbuttoned despite the cold. 2 men flanked him, their eyes quick and restless. "Crowther," Pike said, his voice thick with triumph. "I've come for what's mine." Elias didn't move. "Nothing of yours here." Pike's gaze slid past him to where Clara stood, just inside, coat drawn tight, hair tumbling over one shoulder. "There she is, little runaway. Town's been whispering all sorts of things about her." The smaller of Pike's men smirked. "Apache's woman," he said, tasting the words like something bitter. Clara's hand tightened on her coat's lapel, but then she stepped forward just enough that the scar on her shoulder, still red and raw, caught the winter light. "I owe you nothing," she said, her voice low but clear. Pike's jaw shifted. "You were promised." "I was sold," she cut in. "There's a difference." The bigger man took a step toward her, but Elias's rifle lifted in one smooth motion. The shot split the air, kicking snow into the space between them. The mountains caught the sound and hurled it back, a rolling echo that seemed to decide the matter before anyone spoke again. Pike's men froze. Pike stared at Elias, breathing hard, a vein in his temple jumping. "You think this is the end of it? I think you should start walking before I change my mind," Elias said. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Pike spat into the snow, turned, and trudged back toward the trail. His men followed, glancing over their shoulders until the pines swallowed them whole. Clara didn't move until they were gone. Then her knees gave way, and she sat on the steps, snow melting into her skirts. Elias set the rifle aside and crouched beside her, not touching, just close enough for his shadow to fall over hers. Her words came haltingly, like a creek breaking through ice. My brother thought he was saving me. The letter promised a home. I saw Pike the day I arrived. I knew I couldn't, so I said no. And they said I'd been with an Apache boy. I hadn't. But truth doesn't matter here, does it? Elias studied her face, the way the cold had brightened her eyes. You're not theirs to name, he said. Something in her seemed to steady at that. She looked past him, toward the trail where Pike had vanished, as though measuring the distance between who she'd been and who she might yet become. They went inside without speaking. She set water to boil while he stoked the fire. Snow hissed on the stove, filling the air with the smell of iron and pine. Later, he handed her a pair of snowshoes, small, neat work, the leather binding supple. She ran her hand over the frame, understanding without words that they were meant for her, that he was building for a life in which she stayed. The storm returned that night, winds lashing at the shutters, snow piling high against the door. The fire glowed bright, casting their shadows across the walls, two shapes side by side, still and steady while the world howled outside. She thought of Pike's voice fading into the trees, of the town's whispers carried away on the wind, and of Elias's words, simple and sure. You're not theirs to name. Outside, the trail was already vanishing under the weight of new snow. By morning, no one would be able to say for certain who had passed through these mountains, or which way they'd gone. Inside, she sat with the snowshoes in her lap, the leather warm from her hands, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, she was done running. The morning broke pale and brittle, the kind of winter light that turns every surface to porcelain. Smoke curled from Jedediah Cole's chimney in a thin, wavering thread, but he wasn't inside to tend the fire. He was standing in the snow, one boot sunk deep, staring at the front of his cabin. At first, the shape seemed part of the building, a shadow caught on the eaves. Then it moved, swaying with the faintest creak. A woman, wrists bound above her head to the roof beam, her bare fingers gone white, boots scraping for purchase on the porch rail. Her hair, a mess of pale gold, was caught in the morning wind. Above her head, scorched into the timber, were two words, Apache Lover. The letters were ugly, jagged burns in the grain. He crossed the yard without hurry, but with the heaviness of a man walking toward something that would change the course of his day. She stirred when the snow crunched beneath him, lifting her head just enough to glance his way. Her lips were cracked, the skin around her mouth pale and tight. Jedediah drew his knife, the blade flashing once before he sliced the rope. She crumpled forward, and he caught her against his coat. She smelled faintly of smoke and frost, the scent of someone left outside too long. Not back, she murmured, the words broken by a shallow breath. He didn't ask where she meant. He had an idea, and it was a bitter one. Inside, the cabin's warmth was modest, the fire low but steady. He set her on the chair nearest the hearth and stepped back, letting the heat find her before he did. She sat hunched, hands hidden in her lap, shoulders rising and falling in quick, shallow pulls. He fetched a mug from the shelf, poured hot water from the kettle, and placed it on the table beside her. She didn't lift it until he turned away. He busied himself at the workbench, oiling the hinges of a trap, giving her the dignity of not being watched while she drank. Her voice came after a long stretch of silence. Boone sent them. Jedediah paused, the name a stone in the air between them. Harlan Boone, fat on cattle profits, sharper with his pride than with his mind. The man had been expecting a bride from the east, a woman to grace his ranch. This must be her, the one whispered about in town last week. The gossip said she'd come with a past, soft words traded with an Apache man, though no one could prove it. Proof hadn't mattered. In this country, rumor was enough to hang a name over someone's head like a millstone. You're Clara Whitlock, Jedediah said. She flinched slightly at the sound of her own name, as if it had been used too often lately as a weapon. He went back to the hinge, working slow, the oil seeping into the metal. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls like a restless hand. In town, Nettie Mae would be perched in her sewing shop, feeding the story to anyone willing to listen. Jedediah could picture her leaning forward, voice low. She came all the way out here for Harlan, and he took one look and said he'd never have an Apache's cast off. That's why they strung her up, to warn the rest of us. He didn't say any of this aloud. He'd learned long ago that words could weigh a man down faster than silence. Clara's hands came into the light as she reached for the bread he'd set out. The rope burns raw and reddened against her pale skin. She tore a small piece, chewed it carefully, and set the rest back on the plate. "You're welcome to finish it," he said. Her eyes lifted to his for the first time, startlingly blue, rimmed red from wind or tears. "I'll work for it." That drew something from him, not a smile exactly, but a softening. "You don't have to." "I do." Her gaze held his for a moment longer before she looked down again. As the day thinned toward dusk, she moved from the chair to the hearth, drawn by the fire's heart. She noticed the split seam on her skirt and reached into her small satchel, producing a needle and a length of faded thread. Jedediah, watching from the workbench, saw the steadiness in her fingers despite the raw wrists. She worked as if mending cloth was the only certain thing left in her life. He found a small tin of salve in the cupboard and set it on the table near her. She didn't thank him right away, but later, when she thought he wasn't looking, she rubbed it gently over her wrists. Near nightfall, the knock came. It was Sheriff Amos Burke, hat low over his brow, voice carrying the unease of a man stepping where he didn't want to tread. "Word's out you brought her here," Amos said quietly when Jedediah stepped outside. "You know Boone won't like that. Town's already on edge. You're fixing to inherit her trouble if you keep her." "She's not trouble," Jedediah replied. "She will be. Let her go before it sticks to you." The sheriff left, his boots crunching away through the snow. Inside, Clara had heard every word. She stood near the table, shawl in hand, eyes distant. "You don't need another weight on you," she said softly. "I'll leave." Jedediah stepped past her, took the mended dress from the back of the chair, and set it on the table beside her shawl. He didn't speak, only met her gaze long enough for the meaning to land. She didn't pick up the shawl. The fire cracked softly, the snow whispering against the cabin walls, and between them hung the faintest shift in the air, like a rope giving way beneath a weight. Outside, in the dimming light, the burned letters on the beams still glowed faintly where the winter sun caught them, a cruel brand refusing to fade. Inside, neither of them looked toward the door.